Report 1. The last drink at the historic bar. It was a Wednesday night in Chicago, and the old Capone's bar was about to close its doors forever. The establishment, which had been serving drinks for over a century, was set to be demolished the following week to make way for a new real estate development. Mike Sullivan, a 45-year-old bartender who had worked there for 2 decades, was on duty for the final shift. The bar was practically empty, with only a few regulars finishing their drinks in the main room. As he organized the counter and cleaned glasses, Mike reflected on the years he had spent there. He knew every detail of the place, from the marks on the wooden walls to the stories behind each framed photograph. The clock struck 11:30 p.m. when the last customer left. Mike began his closing routine, meticulously cleaning every surface. The silence in the bar was broken only by the clinking of glasses and the low sound of jazz playing on the radio. At 11:45 p.m., Mike was polishing glasses behind the counter when he heard a gravelly voice. "A straight whiskey, please." Startled, he turned around quickly. Sitting at the bar was a man Mike hadn't seen enter. The stranger wore an impeccable pinstripe suit, a fedora hat, and shiny leather shoes. His clothes looked like they came straight out of the 1920s. Mike hesitated for a moment, confused about how the man had entered without him noticing. Thinking it might be some kind of farewell prank organized by his colleagues, he decided to play along. "Of course, sir," Mike replied, grabbing a bottle of 12-year-old whiskey and a glass. As he poured the drink, he observed the man's face. There was something familiar about him, as if Mike had seen him in some old photograph. The stranger said nothing, just watched Mike with a penetrating gaze. His eyes seemed to contain a mixture of sadness and nostalgia. Mike placed the whiskey glass on the counter and turned to put away the bottle. When he turned back to the customer, the glass was empty and the man had vanished. Stunned, Mike looked around the bar. There was no sign of the mysterious man. The doors were still locked, and no windows were open. It was then that Mike noticed something shining where the man had been sitting. Approaching, he saw that it was a coin, a copper penny, dated 1925. Mike picked up the coin, examining it under the light. It was in perfect condition, as if it had been minted recently, despite being almost 100 years old. Confused and a little scared, Mike quickly finished his tasks and left the bar, locking it for the last time. He spent the night turning the event over in his mind, unable to find a logical explanation. The next morning, still disturbed by the experience, Mike decided to share his story on an online forum dedicated to paranormal accounts. To his surprise, several users responded with intriguing information about Capone's bar. A local historian commented that the bar had been the scene of a famous Prohibition-era murder. In 1925, a well-known gangster had been shot dead while drinking at the counter. Another user, claiming to be a descendant of the former owner, mentioned that stories about the gangster's ghost had been circulating in the family for generations. According to legend, the spirit would occasionally appear, always asking for his last drink. Mike was impressed by the responses. Although he had never believed in ghosts, he couldn't explain what he had witnessed. In the days that followed, as Capone's bar was dismantled, Mike kept the 1925 penny as a memento. That night would forever remain in his memory as the strange epilogue to a chapter in Chicago's history. Report 2. The Basement Door. The mystery of the Portland Bar. The Whiskey River was a popular bar in the heart of Portland, Oregon. Located in a historic building dating back to the late 19th century, the establishment attracted both locals and tourists with its cozy atmosphere, rustic decor, and extensive whiskey selection, featuring labels ranging from classic American bourbon to rare Scottish single malts. The bar was managed by Tom Hansen, a 42-year-old man with a well-groomed beard and an attentive look. Tom had worked there for over a decade, starting as a bartender and climbing the ranks to become manager. He was known for his dedication to the Whiskey River and his deep knowledge of the building's history, which he liked to share with more curious customers. The bar staff always commented on the strange sounds coming from the basement. They were noises hard to describe. Sometimes they sounded like heavy footsteps, other times like heavy objects being dragged across the floor, as if someone was moving old furniture during the night. Sarah, one of the longest-serving waitresses, with her red hair and welcoming smile, often reported hearing the sounds when she went down to fetch supplies like craft beer cases or extra wine bottles. "It's like someone's walking down there," she would say. "But when I get there, it's always empty and quiet. The feeling is very strange, like I'm being watched." Mark, the night bartender, a young man with piercings and a talent for creating innovative cocktails, also had his stories. He swore that sometimes he heard muffled voices coming from the basement, even when the bar was empty and quiet in the early hours of the morning, after the last customer had left and he was finishing cleaning up. He described the voices as indistinct whispers, impossible to understand, but clearly present. The basement itself was a rarely visited place. A heavy solid wood door, reinforced with iron bars and always locked with a sturdy padlock, separated it from the rest of the bar. Tom kept the key with him on a leather keychain and only allowed employees to go down when absolutely necessary, like to check the refrigeration system or to access stock boxes stored down there. Rumors about the basement spread among regular customers. Some speculated that the place was haunted by ghosts of former residents or workers of the building, while others suggested more mundane explanations, such as old pipes creaking, the building's structure settling over time, or even large rats roaming the underground. As the employees' reports became more frequent and detailed, Tom began to feel increasingly intrigued and concerned. He knew he needed to thoroughly investigate the situation, but always found an excuse to postpone the exploration, fearing what he might find down there. On a Thursday night, after closing the bar and serving the last drink, a carefully crafted old-fashioned, Tom finally decided it was time to face the mystery. The bar was empty except for him and Mark, who was finishing cleaning the counter, polishing glasses and organizing bottles. "Mark, I'm going to take a look in the basement," Tom said, his voice betraying slight nervousness, as he wiped the counter with a cloth. "Stick around in case I need help or need you to call the police." Mark nodded, watching as Tom grabbed a powerful LED flashlight he kept in a drawer behind the counter and headed for the basement door. The sound of the key turning in the rusty lock echoed through the silent bar, amplified by the quietness of the night. Tom opened the door slowly, illuminating the steep staircase that descended into total darkness. The air that rose was cold and damp, carrying a strong smell of mold, wet earth, and something else, a subtly metallic odor he couldn't identify. Taking a deep breath to compose himself, Tom began to descend the aged wooden steps, which creaked and groaned under his feet, threatening to give way at any moment. With each step, he expected to hear something, a whisper, a noise, anything that would confirm his employees' reports. But the silence was absolute and oppressive. Reaching the bottom of the stairs, Tom moved the beam of light from the flashlight around the basement. The rough stone walls were covered with thick, dusty cobwebs and piles of crumpled cardboard boxes. Old furniture covered with white sheets and obsolete bar equipment created strange, distorted shadows. It was then that Tom noticed something strange. On the dusty concrete floor, there was a series of wet footprints leading up the stairs towards the door. Confused and with his heart racing, he illuminated the rest of the basement with the flashlight, but the floor was completely dry with no sign of moisture. Tom's heart began to beat even faster. The footprints looked recent, as if someone or something had just climbed the stairs, defying the laws of physics. But that was impossible. The door had been locked with him possessing the only key, and he was the only human present in the bar besides Mark. Suddenly, a muffled noise came from a dark, distant corner of the basement. Tom quickly spun around, pointing the flashlight in the direction of the sound, but saw nothing but shadows dancing on the stone walls. The noise sounded like a light scratch, as if something was moving behind the boxes. Fear finally overcame curiosity and reason. Tom quickly climbed the stairs, nearly tripping over his own foot on one of the loose steps. He slammed the door as he left the basement, locking it with trembling hands and breaking out in a cold sweat. Mark, who had been anxiously waiting near the counter, rushed to help his boss, noticing his terrified expression. "What happened? Are you okay?" he asked. Noting Tom's pale face and glazed look, Tom just shook his head frantically, unable to find words to describe what he had seen and felt down there. He and Mark quickly left the bar, deciding they would deal with the situation in the morning with daylight and clearer minds. The next morning, Tom arrived early at the bar, determined to investigate the basement again, this time with the advantage of sunlight. To his surprise, he found a small group of people gathered in front of the establishment, waiting for him. Among them was Sarah, who seemed agitated and eager to share a discovery. "Tom, you won't believe what we found out," she exclaimed as soon as she saw him approaching, with a look of amazement on her face. Sarah explained that, after hearing about the events of the previous night and inspired by curiosity, she decided to do some research on the history of the building and the land on which it was built. What she discovered was surprising and disturbing. The land where the bar was built had long ago been part of an ancient Native American burial ground, used by a local tribe before the arrival of settlers. Most of the bodies had been removed and transferred to another location when the city expanded and the land was sold for construction. But apparently some important graves and sacred markers had been left behind, forgotten or ignored. Tom listened intently, feeling a chill run down his spine. The exact location of the basement coincided precisely with where one of the main graves, possibly that of a tribal chief or spiritual leader, would have been located. In the days that followed, the story of the Whiskey River and its mysterious basement spread quickly through the city, making headlines in local newspapers and news blogs. Curious customers and adventurers began showing up at the bar, hoping to hear the mysterious sounds, feel some supernatural presence, or simply witness the place where inexplicable events were occurring. Tom, although still disturbed by what he had experienced in the basement, decided to keep the bar running normally. Trying not to give in to panic or sensationalism, he instructed the staff not to feed the rumors, not to exaggerate the stories, and to treat the matter with respect and discretion, avoiding scaring customers or damaging the bar's reputation. However, the events of that night in the basement continued to haunt Tom, disturbing his sleep and fueling his imagination. He often found himself staring fixedly at the locked basement door, wondering what was really hidden on the other side, in the depths of darkness. The strange sounds in the basement continued, though with less frequency and intensity. Some employees reported inexplicable experiences, such as objects mysteriously changing places, lights flickering for no apparent reason, or unexplainable sensations of being watched by an invisible presence. Report 3. Last call. The Throttle and Gears was a biker bar, the kind that smelled of oil and gasoline, located on the outskirts of a small town in the heart of Texas. It wasn't a glamorous place, but rather a refuge for those seeking authenticity. Known for its rustic atmosphere, cold beer served in frosted glass mugs, and loyal customers who became family, the establishment was a popular meeting point for local bikers, garage mechanics, and passing travelers cutting through Route 66. Jake Thompson, a 35-year-old man with faded tattoos on his arms, a fire-breathing dragon on one and the name Betty Lou on the other, and a face weathered by time, with fine lines around his eyes that told stories of laughter and worry, had been working as a bartender there for almost a decade. He knew the bar's routine well, the buzz of Friday nights, the contemplative silence of Sunday afternoons, and its regular patrons, each with their preferred drink and a story to tell. Jake was always ready to serve a cold drink, usually a Lone Star or Shiner Bock, and listen to customers' road stories, often offering advice or a friendly shoulder. It was a Tuesday night, usually a quiet day at Throttle and Gears. The bar was almost empty, with just a few regulars scattered around the worn wooden tables that had witnessed countless pool games and heated discussions about which bike was the best. The low sound of an old Wurlitzer jukebox, which Jake kept lubricated and running, played rock classics like Lynyrd Skynyrd and ZZ Top, creating a cozy and familiar atmosphere, like a warm hug on a cold night. Jake was cleaning glasses behind the counter, using an impeccable white cloth and checking if each glass shone under the dim light. He liked to keep the bar spotless, even when it was empty. Suddenly, the bar door opened with a familiar creak. A man he didn't recognize entered, walking slowly towards the counter. The newcomer wore faded jeans, probably Levi's 501s, weathered leather boots, and a black biker jacket, likely a shot perfecto, with some frayed patches and a subtle smell of leather and gasoline. The stranger sat on one of the high bar stools, directly in front of Jake. His eyes seemed distant, as if he was lost in deep thoughts or reliving some painful memory. Jake noticed that, despite it being a biker bar, he hadn't heard the characteristic sound of a Harley-Davidson engine arriving, nor any other bike. That was unusual. "Evening, friend. What'll it be?" Jake asked, placing a thick paper napkin in front of the man. The napkin had the Throttle and Gears logo printed in black, a gear crossed with a piston. The stranger looked at Jake, seeming to take a few seconds to process the question. "A beer, please. The coldest you've got," he replied in a hoarse voice, as if he hadn't used it in a while. Jake nodded and grabbed a bottle of local beer from the freezer, a Bluebell Creamery Vanilla Stout, opening it with a bottle opener attached to the counter and placing it in front of the customer. The man took the bottle but didn't drink immediately. Instead, he kept looking at the amber liquid, as if he was seeing something beyond the beer, perhaps a reflection of his past, or a glimpse of the future. "You know, I just went through an incredible experience," the man said, breaking the silence. Jake, accustomed to hearing customers and stories, some true, others not so much, leaned slightly over the counter, ready to listen. He knew that sometimes people just needed someone to hear them out. The man began to tell about a motorcycle trip he was making. He described the empty Texas roads, the vastness of the blue sky, the wind in his face, the sense of freedom that only a bike can provide. He talked about the camaraderie among bikers, the improvised camps under the stars, and the feeling of being connected to nature. Jake listened attentively, noting the passion in the man's voice as he spoke about the road, a passion that he himself shared. As the story progressed, Jake began to notice something strange. The man's face, one which had seemed normal when he entered, started showing signs of injuries. A thin cut appeared on his forehead, as if caused by a piece of glass, and blood began to slowly trickle down the side of his face, staining the collar of his jacket. Jake blinked several times, thinking his eyes were playing tricks on him, or that the bar's dim light was distorting his perception. But the changes continued. The man kept talking, seemingly oblivious to the transformations his body was undergoing. The stranger described a sharp curve in the road, a treacherous bend known to local bikers as Devil's Elbow, a truck coming from the opposite direction, high beams bright and blinding his vision. As he spoke, more injuries appeared. His arms showed cuts and scratches, as if he had fallen into a bed of thorns. His leather jacket began to tear in places, revealing the flesh beneath. Jake felt a chill run down his spine. He wanted to interrupt the man, ask if he was okay, offer help, but something stopped him. It was as if he was trapped in a trance, unable to do anything but watch and listen, as if he was witnessing a horror movie firsthand. The man continued his narrative, describing the moment of impact. He talked about the sensation of flying through the air, the shock against the asphalt, the intense pain that ran through his entire body, a pain that seemed to echo in Jake's own body. As the words left his mouth, his body reflected the violence of the accident he was describing, as if he was reliving the moment in real time. Jake watched, horrified, as the man's face became disfigured. Bones seemed to break under the skin, and severe injuries appeared all over his body. The untouched beer in front of him began to mix with drops of blood falling from his battered face, creating a macabre cocktail. The other customers in the bar seemed oblivious to what was happening. They continued their conversations in low voices, drinking their beers, playing pool, as if the bloodied man at the counter was invisible to everyone except Jake. It was as if he was trapped in a parallel reality, where the laws of physics and perception didn't apply. The bartender wanted to scream, call for help, do something, but his body wouldn't respond. He was frozen in place, unable to look away from the surreal scene unfolding before him, like a helpless witness to a nightmare. Finally, the man reached the end of his story. And then, everything went dark, he said, his voice now no more than a whisper, almost inaudible. With these words, the man's body seemed to disintegrate before Jake's eyes, like sand slipping through fingers. In a matter of seconds, the stranger completely disappeared, leaving behind only the untouched beer bottle and a large bloodstain on the counter and floor, a stain that seemed to pulse with a sinister energy. Jake remained paralyzed for a few moments, his brain struggling to process what he had just witnessed. When he finally managed to move, he looked frantically around the bar, hoping someone else had seen what happened, seeking validation for his sanity. To his surprise and horror, nothing seemed out of place. The other customers continued their conversations. The music still played softly on the jukebox, and there was no sign of the man or the blood that Jake was sure had been there just seconds before. It was as if everything had been a hallucination, a creation of his tired mind. Trembling, Jake grabbed a cloth and began to clean the counter, half expecting his hands to find the dampness of blood, but the counter was dry and clean as if nothing had happened. The only evidence of the encounter was the untouched beer bottle, which Jake quickly removed and threw in the trash. The rest of the night passed like a blur for Jake. He continued his work mechanically, serving drinks and making small talk with customers, but his mind was elsewhere, constantly reliving the surreal events he had witnessed. He felt as if he was living in a dream, unable to distinguish between reality and fantasy. When the bar finally closed and the last customer stumbled out, Jake sat on one of the stools, exhausted and confused. He picked up his phone, scrolling distractedly through local news, seeking some distraction, anything to take his mind off what had happened. That's when he saw the headline, "Motorcyclist dies in accident on Highway 16. The article reported that a man had lost control of his bike on a sharp curve, colliding with a truck. The accident had occurred exactly 1 hour before the stranger entered the bar. Jake felt a chill down his spine as he read the details of the accident, which corresponded exactly to the story the mysterious man had told. The description of the victim also matched the stranger's initial appearance: jeans, leather boots, black biker jacket. The article mentioned that the victim was a 35-year-old man named Michael, who was traveling through Texas on his Harley-Davidson. In the days that followed, Jake tried to rationalize what had happened. He considered the possibility of having fallen asleep at work and dreamed the whole situation, or perhaps having suffered some kind of hallucination due to fatigue and stress. He even thought about seeing a doctor, fearing he was losing his sanity. However, the memory of the event remained vivid in his mind, refusing to fade or be explained logically. Jake began to pay more attention to stories from other bartenders and bar staff, seeking accounts of similar experiences. He felt like a detective, looking for clues in a mystery that seemed unsolvable. Report 4. The Stranger in the Mirror. Sarah Reynolds, a 28-year-old elementary school teacher, didn't usually frequent the Lone Wolf, the only bar in the small town of Millbrook. The establishment was known more for its regular patrons and rustic atmosphere than for its sophistication. Sarah preferred quiet nights at home, immersed in a good Jane Austen novel or watching a classic Alfred Hitchcock film. However, on a particularly stressful Friday, after an exhausting week of grading multiplication tables and preparing lessons on the water cycle, she gave in to the persistent invitations from her coworkers, eager for a girls' night out, to unwind and forget about the school routine for a bit. Upon entering the bar, Sarah was immediately enveloped by the lively and noisy atmosphere. The Lone Wolf was packed, with the air saturated with animated conversations, loud laughter, and the nostalgic sound of the jukebox playing country classics from Johnny Cash and 80s rock from Bon Jovi. The smell of spilled beer and cigarettes smoked outside lingered in the air, mixing with the aroma of French fries and grilled burgers coming from the small kitchen in the back, where the cook, known only as Big Joe, reigned supreme. Sarah and her friends, after some difficulty navigating through the crowd, found a somewhat isolated table in the corner, near a foggy window that looked out onto the main street, where the dim light from the street lamps created mysterious halos. They ordered a round of margaritas, the frosty glasses decorated with lime slices and salty rims covered with kosher salt. The conversation flowed naturally, moving from work challenges, the difficulty in dealing with overprotective parents and endless bureaucracy, to the latest town gossip and weekend plans, like the local craft fair and the outdoor movie screening in the park. Sarah felt relaxed, laughing at her colleagues, jokes, and sharing funny stories about her students, like the day one of them tried to explain Einstein's theory of relativity using building blocks. It was in this moment of relaxation that she first noticed the man, sitting alone on the other side of the room, near the worn wooden bar where bottles of whiskey and tequila gleamed under the yellowish light. The stranger was partially hidden by the shadows cast by the bar's low lights, but Sarah could clearly see that he was staring fixedly at her. His eyes didn't move, focused solely on her with a disturbing intensity, as if she were the only person in the room. Initially, Sarah tried to ignore it, attributing the fixed gaze to excess alcohol or the bar's lively atmosphere. She focused on the conversation with her friends, forcing a smile and trying to convince herself that she was imagining things, that it was just the week's fatigue playing tricks on her. As the night wore on and more drinks were consumed, Sarah was already on her third margarita, feeling the effect of the alcohol relaxing her tense muscles. The uncomfortable sensation of being watched persisted, becoming increasingly bothersome. Sarah occasionally cast quick glances in the man's direction, hoping he had looked away or left, but he remained motionless, his eyes still fixed on her. He seemed oblivious to his surroundings, to the people passing by, to the excited shouts of pool players engaged in a heated match, focused only on Sarah. He wore a dark overcoat, despite the heat in the bar, and his hair was slicked back, revealing a high, wrinkled forehead. She began to feel nervous, her skin tingling with a sensation of imminent danger that she couldn't explain, a visceral intuition that something was wrong. Uncomfortable and feeling an increasing unease, Sarah decided to go to the bathroom to compose herself and try to dispel the sensation of being watched. She excused herself to her friends, making up an excuse about touching up her makeup, and headed towards the back of the bar. The hallway leading to the bathrooms was narrow and dimly lit, with posters of old bands and events covering the walls, some torn and faded by time. Sarah could feel the stranger's gaze following her as she walked away, like a physical weight on her back, an invisible pressure that left her breathless. The women's bathroom was small and poorly lit, with two worn stalls with creaking doors and a cracked porcelain sink under a large antique mirror, probably original to the bar. The mirror's surface had dark spots and signs of age, giving it a somber and almost threatening appearance, as if it had been witnessing obscure secrets for decades. A single fluorescent light flickered irregularly on the ceiling, casting strange shadows across the corners of the bathroom, creating the illusion of figures moving on the walls. Sarah approached the sink, her hands trembling slightly as she turned on the faucet. The cold water ran over her wrists, offering brief relief from her growing nervousness, an attempt to bring her senses back to reality. Taking a deep breath to calm herself, Sarah raised her eyes to the mirror, expecting to find a normal reflection that would reassure her, a familiar image that would remind her that everything was fine. What she saw left her frozen, paralyzed with fear. In the reflection, clearly visible behind her, was the same man who had been incessantly observing her in the bar. His image in the mirror was sharp and unmistakable, but there was something strange about his expression, an empty and distant look that disturbed her even more. Sarah could see every detail of his pale face, his dark, lifeless eyes, his mouth slightly open as if he were about to speak, as if he were trying to communicate something she couldn't understand. He seemed closer in the mirror than he actually was in the bar, as if the distance between them had inexplicably shortened. Sarah's heart raced in her chest, beating so hard she could hear it echoing in her ears. She turned abruptly, expecting to confront the man, ready to scream for help or run. But the bathroom was completely empty. The stalls were closed, and there was no other exit besides the door she had entered through. The air suddenly felt colder, and Sarah felt a shiver run down her spine, a sensation of cold that came from within. She looked back at the mirror, but now she only saw her own reflection, pale and frightened, eyes wide with fear. The fluorescent light continued to flicker, creating a strobe effect that distorted her image in the mirror, making her appear even more disturbed, confused, frightened, and feeling an inexplicable chill that seemed to come from deep within her bones. Sarah quickly left the bathroom, nearly tripping over her own feet in her haste to return to the main room. Her thoughts were in a whirlwind, trying to understand what had happened. Was she going crazy? Had it just been a hallucination caused by stress and alcohol? Or was there something more sinister happening? Something that defied logic and reason? Maybe the mirror was distorting reality, creating an illusion that was terrifying her. Upon returning to the main room, her eyes immediately searched for the table where the man had been sitting. To her shock and horror, he was still there, in exactly the same position, without having moved an inch. His eyes were still fixed on her, with the same disturbing intensity as before. It was as if he hadn't left his spot, as if time hadn't passed. The impossibility of the situation hit Sarah like a punch to the stomach. There was no way he could have been in the bathroom and returned to his table so quickly, without her seeing him. The physics of that moment seemed to defy all natural laws. Overwhelmed by panic and feeling vulnerable, Sarah grabbed her purse from the table. Ignoring the confused and concerned looks from her friends, she mumbled an incoherent excuse, something about a sudden headache and the need to go home, and hurriedly left the bar. Her footsteps echoed on the empty sidewalk as she ran down Millbrook's main street, the streetlights creating elongated shadows that seemed to follow her, as if dancing around her. Sarah didn't stop running until she reached home, her hands shaking as she struggled with the keys to open the door, feeling as if she were being pursued by something invisible. Once inside, Sarah locked the door and closed all the windows, drawing the curtains and turning on all the lights, transforming her apartment into an illuminated fortress. She curled up on the couch, wrapping herself in a blanket as if it were a protective shield against the inexplicable, seeking comfort in its familiarity. Her heart was still racing, and every little noise made her jump, like the creaking of the wind against the windows or the ticking of the clock on the wall. Sarah spent the night wide awake, reliving the events at the bar in her mind, trying to find a logical explanation for what had happened, but to no avail. The image of the man in the mirror, his empty and frightening gaze, seemed etched in her memory, like an indelible tattoo on her soul. Eventually, seeking some kind of explanation or consolation, Sarah decided to share her experience online. She created an anonymous account on Reddit's Let's Not Meet forum, a space dedicated to stories of frightening encounters with strangers. With trembling fingers, she typed out her story, describing in detail what had happened that night at the Lone Wolf, from the bar's atmosphere to the man's disturbing gaze and the vision in the mirror. Sarah hesitated before clicking post, fearing that people would think she was crazy or would just mock her fear. But the need to share her burden, to seek answers or at least validation for her experience, overcame her apprehension. She hoped to find someone who could understand what she had gone through, someone who could offer a light in the midst of darkness. To her surprise, the story quickly gained traction on the forum. Comments began to appear, some offering words of comfort and support, others sharing similar experiences in bars and public places. Some people suggested rational explanations, a strange reflection, a bad prank, the effects of alcohol, while others delved into more supernatural theories, talking about ghosts, parallel universes, and inexplicable phenomena, such as the Mandela effect or multiverse theory. Sarah read each comment avidly, looking for something that could help her understand what had happened, a clue that could unravel the mystery of that night. Report 5. The Woman in Red. The Blue Note Jazz Club, nestled in the beating heart of New Orleans, French Quarter, was much more than just a jazz establishment. It was a sacred sanctuary of music, a convergence point where history and melody intertwined in a tapestry of perfect harmony. The imposing 19th century building, adorned with its exposed brick walls that told silent stories and aged wooden beams that whispered secrets of the past, radiated a palpable atmosphere of nostalgia and an irresistible allure of mystery. On a Friday night that seemed indistinguishable from any other, the intriguing enigma of the woman in red first emerged, casting a shadow of curiosity over the club. Mark Sullivan, an experienced bartender with years of serving and observing the myriad of characters frequenting the Blue Note, was the first to glimpse the mysterious figure. As he skillfully prepared drinks, mixing classic cocktails and innovative creations, he caught sight of a woman in a vibrant red dress gliding gracefully between tables, moving with an ethereal fluidity that defied explanation. As the night progressed and jazz music filled the air, enveloping the club in a sensual atmosphere, more people reported sighting the enigmatic woman. The description remained consistently the same: an attractive young woman with long black hair framing her face, wearing a stunning red dress that seemed out of place, as if transported from a bygone era. The most intriguing detail was the expression of deep sadness that lingered on her face, a veil of melancholy that seemed to tell an untold story. Emily Rodriguez, a diligent waitress who knew the ins and outs of the Blue Note like the back of her hand, had the closest and most unsettling encounter. She described feeling a sudden and inexplicable wave of cold, as if the ambient temperature had dropped drastically in an instant. Upon turning, she saw the woman in red standing just a few steps away, her eyes seeming to overflow with sadness, a depth of emotion that left her deeply disturbed. Before Emily could react or even utter a word, the figure vanished into thin air, like a fleeting mirage. The sightings continued in the following weeks, transforming the Blue Note into a focal point for the curious, skeptics, and paranormal enthusiasts. The story of the woman in red spread quickly through the local community, fueled by word of mouth and social media, drawing even more attention to the already popular jazz club. It was then that Betty Johnson, an elderly neighborhood resident with a surprisingly vivid memory, shared a story she had kept for decades, a secret whispered among close friends. She spoke of Eloise Martin, a talented jazz singer who regularly performed at the Blue Note in the 1950s. Eloise was known for her powerful and moving voice that could captivate any audience, as well as for her signature red dress that she wore for all her performances, a symbol of her passion and talent. Eloise's story, as told by Betty, was tragic and moving. On a full moon night in 1954, during a particularly passionate and intense performance, Eloise collapsed on stage and died due to an undiagnosed cerebral aneurysm, a medical condition she was unaware of. Betty vividly remembered the shock and sadness that enveloped the Blue Note on that fateful night, a collective mourning that hung over the club for weeks. Betty's revelation established an undeniable and eerie connection between Eloise's tragic story and the recent sightings of the woman in red. The similarity in description was striking and undeniable. The bright red dress that caught the eye, the long black hair framing her face, the melancholic beauty that emanated from her presence. The Blue Note embraced its mysterious and haunting history, acknowledging the importance of honoring the past. A small memorial for Eloise Martin was created in a quiet corner of the bar, a shrine dedicated to her memory. An old photograph of the singer, dressed in her famous red dress, and was prominently displayed, with fresh flowers being laid daily by admirers and the curious. The sightings continued, though less frequently, as if Eloise's presence was gradually calming. Interestingly, many observed that the apparitions seemed to be more prevalent on full moon nights, echoing the fateful night of Eloise's death. Some patrons reported hearing fragments of a soft, melancholic jazz melody in moments of silence, as if Eloise herself was singing a lullaby from beyond. The Blue Note became a place of pilgrimage for those intrigued by paranormal phenomena and ghost stories. Groups of tourists lined up outside, eager to have their own encounter with the Lady in Red, as she became known, hoping to catch a glimpse of the specter. The bar even created a special cocktail called Eloise's Lament, in honor of the legend, a sweet and bitter drink that reflected the complexity of Eloise's story. Mark Sullivan, the bartender who had the first sighting, became a sort of unofficial expert on the Lady in Red legend, sharing his experiences and insights with visitors. He diligently compiled stories from patrons who claimed to have witnessed the apparition, noting patterns and similarities in the accounts, creating an informal archive of paranormal encounters. Emily Rodriguez, the waitress who had the most intimate encounter with the apparition, felt compelled to research more about the history of jazz in New Orleans. Delving into archives and libraries, she discovered that Eloise Martin, although not widely known outside the city, had been a promising figure in the local music scene, a rising star whose talent was tragically cut short. The story of the Blue Note Jazz Club's Lady in Red attracted local and national media attention. Newspapers published articles about the phenomenon, exploring the origins of the legend and the experiences of those who claimed to have seen the apparition. A television show dedicated to urban legends produced a special segment about the bar, interviewing staff and patrons and investigating the mysteries of the Blue Note. This further boosted the Blue Note's popularity, transforming it into a must-visit tourist destination. The online community also became involved in the mystery, with enthusiasts and skeptics weighing in. Forums dedicated to discussions about the paranormal buzzed with theories and debates about the Lady in Red, with users sharing their own experiences and offering alternative explanations. Some users shared their own experiences at the Blue Note, while others offered skeptical explanations, attributing the sightings to imagination or suggestion. A group of experienced paranormal researchers conducted an overnight investigation at the bar, using specialized equipment to detect unusual activities. Although they didn't uncover concrete proof of a ghost's presence, they reported strange experiences, such as unexplained temperature fluctuations, the sound of footsteps in empty areas of the bar, and anomalous readings on their EMF, electromagnetic field meters. As the Blue Note's fame grew, older New Orleans residents began to share their own memories of Eloise Martin, painting a more complete portrait of her life and personality. A retired saxophonist remembered playing with her, describing her as a passionate perfectionist who always strived for perfection in her music. A former waitress spoke about Eloise's kindness and generosity, recalling how she always had a smile and a kind word for everyone. These personal stories helped humanize the legend, transforming the Lady in Red from a mere specter into a real person with dreams, passions, and a tragic history. Eloise began to be seen as a talented artist whose life was tragically cut short, a tragic figure whose memory deserved to be honored. The impact of the legend extended beyond the Blue Note itself, influencing other establishments in the city. Other bars and jazz clubs in New Orleans began reporting their own sightings of mysterious figures, although none captured the public's imagination quite like the Lady in Red. The story inspired local artists to create artwork inspired by the legend. A painter created a series of paintings depicting an ethereal woman in a red dress in various iconic New Orleans locations, capturing the essence of mystery and melancholy. A local composer wrote a melancholic jazz tune titled Eloise's Last Song, which became a local hit, played repeatedly on radio stations and in jazz clubs. Report 6, Rusty Nail Zoe, a dedicated and appreciated employee who had been working at the Rusty Nail for 3 years, knew the bar's routine well, every nook and cranny, every regular customer and their drink preferences. She served drinks efficiently with a genuine smile, exchanged friendly words with regular patrons, remembering their names and favorite drinks, the usual, Mr. Johnson, and kept a watchful eye for any signs of trouble, acting as a silent guardian of the bar's well-being. She was known for her ability to diffuse arguments before they escalated and for her impeccable memory for complex orders. Around 10:30 p.m., Zoe was cleaning a table near the dimly lit hallway leading to the bathrooms, removing empty glasses and crumpled napkins, when she heard something that made her freeze in place, the broom slipping from her fingers and falling to the floor with a dull thud. A shrill, terrifying scream echoed through the bar, clearly coming from the direction of the women's bathroom, cutting through the air like a sharp knife. The sound was so intense and filled with dread, a piercing mixture of pain and terror, that for a moment everyone in the bar fell silent, as if time had abruptly stopped, looking towards the source of the noise. Their conversations interrupted mid-sentence. Even the bartender, a usually unflappable guy named Mike, stopped polishing a glass and stared fixedly at the hallway. Zoe, being the closest employee and feeling the weight of responsibility, felt obligated to investigate, her heart pounding heavily in her chest as if it wanted to escape. With her heart racing, beating like a frantic drum in her chest, she cautiously approached the women's bathroom door, each step heavier than the last, as if her feet were covered in lead. "Hello? Is everything all right in there?" she called out, her voice trembling slightly, trying to project confidence and authority, although she was terrified inside. There was no response, just the oppressive and suffocating silence that followed the scream, a silence that seemed even more threatening than the scream itself. Gathering courage, taking a deep breath to calm her frayed nerves, Zoe pushed the door and entered the bathroom. What she found left her perplexed and frightened, a sense of unreality taking over her, as if she were entering a nightmare. The bathroom was completely empty, with no sign of recent occupation, no trace that anyone had been there, not even a crumpled paper towel in the trash can. However, something was terribly wrong. A heavy and sinister atmosphere hanging in the air, like an invisible mist that suffocated the environment. All 3 sink faucets were open, water running in constant streams and wasting precious gallons, creating a small lake on the floor. The sound of running water created an unsettling background noise in the silence of the bathroom, amplifying the sense of dread and disorientation. The mirrors above the sinks were completely fogged up, as if a dense and supernatural mist had formed in the small space, obscuring reflections and distorting reality. Zoe approached, feeling an inexplicable chill run down her spine. Despite the stuffy heat of the bar and the steam from the hot water, a shiver that made her feel vulnerable and exposed. It was then that she noticed something that made her blood run cold in her veins, paralyzing her in place and catching her breath. Written on the fogged mirror, in red letters that looked like fresh blood, thick and dripping as if they had been painted with a macabre brush, were the words, "He's coming." The message seemed to pulse with an evil and threatening energy, as if it were alive. Zoe ran out of the bathroom, screaming for help, her body shaking uncontrollably and her eyes wide with terror. The bar manager, Hector Alvarez, a burly man with a heart of gold and a reputation for keeping calm under pressure, rushed to see what was happening, his calm expression turning to concern and then alarm upon seeing Zoe's state. Upon hearing Zoe's frantic account and seeing the state of the bathroom, he immediately decided to evacuate the bar and call the police, prioritizing everyone's safety. The customers, confused and frightened by the sudden evacuation order, were quickly escorted out of the establishment, some stumbling in their haste and knocking over chairs in the process. Many remained on the sidewalk, curious to know what was happening and trying to understand the situation, murmuring theories and speculations in low voices, while others departed hastily, clearly disturbed by the incident and wanting to distance themselves as much as possible from the rusty nail. When the police arrived, with blaring sirens cutting through the silence of the night and flashing lights, they conducted a thorough search of the bar, focusing especially on the women's bathroom, analyzing every inch of the space for clues or evidence. However, they found nothing beyond what Zoe had described. The faucets were still open, the mirrors fogged up, but the terrifying message had mysteriously disappeared, as if it had never existed, leaving the police perplexed and skeptical. The officers interviewed Zoe, Hector, and several customers who were present at the bar, recording every detail in their notebooks and trying to piece together a puzzle of events. Everyone confirmed hearing the scream, but no one besides Zoe had entered the bathroom or seen the message on the mirror, making the case even stranger, inexplicable, and frustrating for the investigators. In the days that followed, the incident at the Rusty Nail became the main topic of conversation throughout the neighborhood, dominating local newspaper headlines and street corner gossip. Theories and speculations circulated freely, ranging from bad jokes and elaborate pranks planned by some group of teenagers to supernatural explanations and paranormal events, fueling people's imagination. Zoe, still shaken by the incident and struggling to sleep without being plagued by nightmares, decided to share her experience on an online forum dedicated to horror stories and paranormal accounts, seeking some comfort, validation, and understanding from others who might have gone through similar experiences. Her detailed account of the incident quickly gained attention, attracting comments and theories from other users, creating an online frenzy and transforming Zoe into a central figure of an intriguing mystery. Some forum readers suggested that Zoe might have been the victim of a hallucination caused by excessive stress and sleep deprivation, while others firmly believed that she had witnessed a genuine paranormal event, a manifestation of something beyond human comprehension and the laws of nature. A week after the incident, an anonymous forum user, using the pseudonym Chicago Historian, made a shocking revelation that changed the course of the story and added a dark layer to the mystery. He claimed to be a local historian specializing in Chicago's history and shared information about a brutal crime that had occurred at the Rusty Nail decades earlier, a dark secret buried in the past and forgotten by most. According to the historian llorona, in 1978, a young woman named Emily Parker was brutally murdered in the bar's women's bathroom, an act of violence that shocked the local community and left a lasting scar. The crime shocked the local community at the time, but the killer was never caught, leaving a trail of fear, uncertainty, and an unsolved case that haunted the local police. The story of Emily Parker's murder quickly spread online, being shared on various forums and social media groups, reigniting interest in the forgotten case and adding a new level of horror to the Rusty Nail story. Many saw a disturbing connection between the unsolved crime and the recent incident experienced by Zoe, a sinister link between the past and the present. Local newspapers picked up the story, publishing articles that explored both the recent incident and the old crime, thoroughly investigating the mysteries of the Rusty Nail and trying to unravel the truth behind the strange events. A local newspaper, the Chicago Daily, published a detailed report, interviewing old residents who remembered Emily's murder, bringing to light long-forgotten memories and reigniting the debate about the case. One of the interviewees, an elderly lady who had lived in the neighborhood for over 50 years, vividly remembered the night of the crime, her voice choked with emotion and her eyes filled with sadness. She described how the entire neighborhood was in shock and how fear persisted for months after the murder, changing the atmosphere of the community and leaving an indelible mark on everyone. The Rusty Nail, which had temporarily closed after the incident with Zoe, reopened its doors a week later, but the atmosphere had changed forever. However, the bar was never the same. Many regular customers hesitated to use the women's bathroom, and some refused to enter the establishment altogether, haunted by fear and the macabre history of the place. Zoe, in turn, decided not to return to work at the Rusty Nail. The trauma of what she had experienced was too much to bear, leaving deep emotional scars that prevented her from moving forward. She found employment at another bar on the other side of the city, seeking a fresh start and a calmer environment, but the memory of that night continued to haunt her, like a persistent ghost that refused to leave. Hector Alvarez, the bar manager, tried to handle the situation as best he could, seeking solutions to calm the nerves of his customers and employees and restore the Rusty Nail's reputation. He hired a medium to energetically cleanse the place, performing a purification ritual with incense and chants, hoping to appease the fears of customers and employees and drive away any negative energy. However, the feeling of uneasiness persisted, like a shadow hovering over the bar and reminding everyone of the dark past.